some 50 or 60 minutes, it was mentioned that I am an attorney and I'm an elder law attorney. But to put it bluntly with you, I wasn't really practicing elder law, I was practicing Medicaid planning. And for those of you who don't know what Medicaid planning, it's working with families who have assets and qualifying them for a program they're not entitled to. The pause is intentional. I want to tell you who came to see me, and there's a reason I'm telling you this. Over the years, the families who needed care didn't come to see me. The children of the families came to see me, and every one of them started the conversation with, "We just want you to know this has nothing to do with the money." It had everything to do with the money. And I'd ask them if they knew that their parents own long-term care insurance. 95% of them said no. I asked the families, asked the children, if you know, did your parents ever look at long-term care insurance? We're not sure. I would say about half of the clients who came to see me had financial advisors. And I asked the children, was it ever proactively discussed with your clients? And I say about 15, 20% said, not that I know of. The average net worth of someone who came to see me, $850,000, cold cash, no debt, not including their house. I routinely saw people with $1.5 million to $2 million. For what purpose? To get them on Medicaid to protect their money. I say this respectfully. The reason people came to see someone like myself is that someone wasn't doing their job. And that is what this conversation is about, is to give you compelling reasons to change a reactive conversation about the subject to a proactive one. And we start with the title, Why a Plan for Extended Care is a Critical Component in a Retirement Portfolio. Let me just show you this advisory for a moment, which is required. And then we'll get right to the subject. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So there are 5 commonly accepted risks of financial viability during later years. Longevity, outliving your principal, your capital, market volatility, inflation, excessive withdrawal risk, medical expenses, and myself, Nationwide, and many others believe you have to add one other issue, and that is care over an extended period of years. Let me start with this. There's perhaps no other unexpected serious event in life that has the potential of causing serious, if not irreversible, consequences to a family than a need for care over an extended period of years. Now, for those of you who have a client who has died during working years or know someone who has died during working years, you might suggest that's not true. Losing a spouse during working years is far more serious, really. Well, let me give you some thoughts here. There is at least a possibility of a surviving spouse being able to seek employment to put the family back on their feet. Maybe not to the extent that they were prior to the death, but there's a possibility they have the time. I will suggest to you that an unexpected death brings children together for a common purpose. In this subject of extended care, if your client ever needs care of an extended period of years, there's a very good possibility the children will never talk to each other again. And paying for care, carefully thought out portfolios, the purpose of which is to generate predictable streams of income in later years, will utterly be disrupted, which means the client cannot keep financial commitments and poses a serious threat to a surviving spouse. That is the subject, not the product. And that's what we're going to spend some time on today. So here's the agenda. Is the conversation worth having? Subset, particularly in a COVID-19 environment. What does that have to do with anything? I'll show you in a second. If we do our job right, you'd reach out to DUI and say, you know something, I want to know more about it. As an advisor, I never really understood it would affect my business model. I never thought of it as a subject. I was thinking about it as a product. We're not going to talk about product law today. Part 2, if you now believe the subject is serious enough, we're going to change the intent of the conversation. We're going to give you some insights into how to conduct a conversation that eliminates objections. We're not going to talk about risk. We're going to talk about consequences. We're not going to suggest that the client needs care, which is exactly what he thinks or she thinks. We're going to suggest a set of consequences. And our job is to show you how serious those consequences are so you can convey them to the client. I believe as advisors, you have the same responsibility I do as a lawyer, is to lay out ideas or subjects that impact clients' families. Let them decide if it's serious enough. So we'll show you how to do that in part 2. And then we'll show you the business you're in, which is to create plans. We're going to show you how the consequences of extended care are mitigated, not with the product, but with a plan. And then finally, we'll show you what long-term care solutions actually do, such as not protect the individual. We'll show you how they use to fund a plan. So that is the agenda and the time that we have. Here are the goals: to give financial professionals compelling reasons why they should proactively engage clients in a discussion. And by that, we're referring to bringing the subject up during any review of a portfolio. And that requires you thinking that the subject is serious enough that you bring it up with people who don't want to hear it. Who are those people? They're healthy. They're in their 50s. What do they want to hear about long-term care, extended care for? See, we want to show you that if the subject is taken seriously enough, they'll want to hear about it if it comes from you. So that's turning a reactive conversation, waiting for someone to bring the subject up to you, to proactively engaging clients. Second, to give you the skill set to successfully engage perhaps the most difficult demographic, healthy men, and to a degree, healthy women, by changing the intent of the conversation. No more risk, no more threats, simply a recitation of the consequences to those people he or she invited into their life and said they devoted their life to. Anything that affects your client's family is something he or she will listen to. And finally, to suggest a different way to position long-term care solutions. So those are our goals. Let's get right to it. Again, thank you for being on the program. So part 1, let's take a look at the knowledge of the subject. So you likely know a lot of this, but I just want to put it into a different framework for you because it sets the foundation for the consequences. So here's what you likely know. The need for care is caused by impairments. There are 2. There's a physical impairment, and these are illnesses that can be managed with medication and therapy, but cannot be cured by either. So Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, psoriatic arthritis. My son has that. He's 38 years old. Psoriatic autoimmune disease. They can be managed with medication. They cannot be cured. And of course, the second one I think you are familiar with, that's a cognitive impairment, and that's a marked decline in one's intellect. What they both share in common is that they're a safety issue. They seriously compromise one's safety. Here's what you may not know about providing care. These impairments so severely compromise clients that they're no longer safe, therefore jeopardizing the innocent. By definition, providing care becomes all-consuming, which creates the first of 2 sets of potentially irreversible consequences. Here we go. Let's take a look at the serious consequences of COVID-19 has on the portfolio right now. I think you're all familiar with recent articles about COVID-19 that have been written about the serious long-term consequences. Those on ventilators have suffered a disproportionately high risk of chronic illness leading to inability to work or get through the most basic of daily routines. There are the articles. Now, what impact does that have on your business model? If someone's no longer able to work, can they make the contributions to the portfolio which will be used in later years? What about their ability to survive without going into the portfolio that exists? So that is a current problem caused by this awful pandemic. I just want to bring it to your attention. And by the way, it was brought to my attention by Nationwide. And many of the wholesalers were saying that they were getting questions by financial advisors. How do we deal with this? We have clients who are going through this right now. So the consequences aren't just when you're later in life, but can happen at any time. So ladies and gentlemen, let's share with you what the emotional and physical well-being, what happens to those people that you're committed to protect, and show you how severely impaired they can become. Providing care to a chronically ill person makes healthy caregivers chronically ill, and in many instances creates resentment. The marriage may not be in such good shape. Here's a spouse now taking care of someone who may not have been the most ideal person to spend a life with. And now this person is chronically ill and needs constant attention. There's some people shaking their heads. That means you've been through it. For those of you who have not been through it, please trust me when I share this with you. I did this for 20 years. Providing care to those who are chronically ill often makes healthy caregivers chronically ill. It must, because the care is all consuming. At least one child, if there are children, will have to put aside her or his life if the parent is no longer safe. This has a direct impact on the child's well-being in the family. How do I know this? I have 3 children by my first wife, who I'm quite friendly with. She never remarried. And what I did is I played out what would happen to our children, which are my oxygen, my adult children, if their mother ever needed care and I didn't like what I saw. What started going through my head is where would their mother live? How would she be taken care of? What would it do to the child who's providing the care? What would it do to that child's family, that child's children? What would happen to that child's relationship with siblings who may not have helped out? It's pretty serious consequences. Providing care is rarely shared between siblings, creating friction between those who do and those who don't. Now, am I talking about any risk whatsoever? Have I mentioned any risk? Risk remains static, 0, because the people you're talking to who don't want to talk to you deeply believe they're not going to need care. But if you discuss this and look at it as an approach based on consequences, that will get his or her attention. And what do you want to share with them? This. The result is that providing care rarely brings siblings together. It tears them apart, causing irreversible consequences to present and future generations. I've seen it happen. Now, let me sum up what happens here. The person who said their responsibility was to take care of their family and to protect their family is now in a position where those that he or she sought to protect must put their lives aside to protect him or her. And that should be unacceptable once it's explained to your client. Let me give you an example. Part of what we teach you is how to conduct a conversation, and here's what's part of it. Saying to a client, let's say the client's name is Stuart. Stuart, I can't imagine you ever want your children involved with this. And a decent father would say, absolutely not. My kids are on their own. They have their own lives. It's not their concern, which is what most decent men would say. But watch what we would teach you to say. Pause for a second and then tell them, and then state, tell me what choice they'll have. And then the client looks at you and says, are you serious? I never thought of it like that. You see, the advice that we're offering to you is advice on consequences. Did Stuart want to hear this? Likely not, because he's healthy, never had a health issue. What does he want to hear about long-term care, extended care for? Well, he needs to. But our job is to give you compelling reasons to proactively engage the client. I want to take a moment and talk about second marriages. I'm in a second marriage, and let me play this out for you and how powerful these ideas are and how you can share it with clients in second marriages, okay? So let's start with this. My wife has assets. Her name is Susan. I have assets. She has 4 children. I have 3 children. Do our kids get along? Kind of. Yeah, they're okay. Do her kids love me? No, I'm a nice guy and nice to her. Let's leave it at that. So now let's play that out. I need care. I'm 72. I need care of an extended period of years. And I hope my wife would take care of me. So she starts to fail providing care to someone who's chronically ill. What are her kids thinking? Aren't her kids thinking, why aren't your children taking care of you? They're seeing their mother starting to fail taking care of someone not their father. How powerful is this discussion with clients in second marriages? Well, what if I don't have sufficient assets and she has to spend whose assets? Her assets or her kids' assets? Yes. And the kids start to think, why is mom spending our money on him? Now, did I say this is going to happen? No. I'm putting it in terms of a consequence. And I have to suggest to you that if you bring this to a client's attention in a second marriage, they'll absolutely understand. A bit later on, I'll show you how a plan and a product mitigates those potential consequences. Just want to take a minute in second marriages. Let's take a look at the second set of consequences, everyone. Paying for care disrupts every plan to secure a sense of financial viability. Just pause there for a second. You worked a lifetime with clients, taking assets, have them grow in a fiduciary manner so they're available to generate predictable streams of income. So let me show you how this event disrupts that business concept, that business plan. Many people think that long-term care, and by the way, I refer to it as extended care for a very specific reason. If you start a conversation with clients about long-term care, they immediately think you're talking about what? Old people, nursing homes, dementia, incontinence. No conversation, and see ya. If you start a conversation with the expression extended care, you know what they're likely to say? What do you mean? And you can continue the conversation. That's why we use the expression extended care. So let me show you what happens when a client needs care over an extended period of years. Many of you think that this is going to, they're going to lose their assets. That's not true at all. Extended care is not an asset issue. It's a cash flow issue. Stop and think about it for a second. Paying for care comes from cash flow. So now you have to reallocate it. But here's the problem. It's likely that successful people live on all or close to all of their income as they move into the future. Shifting income to pay for care has a direct impact on the client's ability to keep these financial commitments. Think about that for a second. Which one of the following commitments are discretionary, non-essential to your client? Helping a child has not made the best decisions. I do volunteer work for the local probate courts, probate and family courts, and I've seen families come in asking for guardianships over adult children who are making awful decisions. They're involved with drugs, whatever it might be, and they're spending their money, which they never thought they had to. So now one of them needs care. Do they stop taking care of this child or helping this child? Contributions to a 529 program. My former wife and I have 5 children, and my wife and I have a 20-year-old. We make contributions to the 529 program. Wouldn't it make sense for you to share with me that if I ever needed care, I might not be able to keep those commitments? Tithing. Tithing is a very important part of my life and a very important part of your client's life. They may not be able to keep tithing. Now, you can argue these are discretionary expenses, but they're not. Contributions to 529 are not discretionary, they're essential. A boat. Yeah, a boat. My father had a 38-foot sport fisherman. He had a severe stroke. He couldn't captain the boat anymore. We were talking about selling it. He said, I'm not selling the boat. Why? I want to sit on it. And the boat wasn't just for him, it was for his family. You see what I'm talking about? You see all the things you shared with a client who shared with you what was important to him or them. And now look what happens with your ability to keep these commitments because you have to reallocate cash flow. Family vacations, club memberships. So this is what happens. This is the situation the family is in now. There's a member who has a chronic debilitating illness. Either the family provides it and it just eats at them, or they bring in professionals, but who pays for the professionals? You see where it comes from? I will suggest this to you in the 20 years I practice this. Many will not go into the capital. They will not go into the income. You know what they do? They do the work themselves, which creates further problems, further declines in well-being. This is not at risk. This is a consequence. So using income to keep financial commitments at the same time is in effect double counting it. You're asking to do 2 things at once. As such, as a financial professional, it would undermine, I believe, your commitment to execute carefully thought out plans to generate income for specific purposes. Am I asking you, is Nationwide, is BOI asking you to talk about risk and use statistics and cost of care? Not at all. We're simply asking you to consider proactively discussing the subject with the client and laying out the consequences and let the client decide if they're serious enough. It's a powerful thought. And for those of you who are selling insurance, I've always looked at that as a professional, meaning that you're not selling a product, you're selling advice. And I believe your very premise.
I'm on a kind of a webinar. Why?
I'm going to do it 12 o'clock.
Everyone okay there? Mickey? Yes? As an insurance professional, your very premise for being in business is to protect families at all stages of life. And that's undermined. Just take a minute, if you will, on wealthy clients. And many of you believe that they can cover the cost of care. You know something? Don't disagree with you. They can. You have $1 million, you're not likely to run out of money. But let's look at it differently and the impact it has on your business. First, may I ask you to consider that the portfolio is capital in nature and that you mention that to clients, and successful clients know what capital is. A retirement portfolio is in its very nature a capital asset, the intent of which is to generate predictable streams of income. But watch what happens when you go into that capital. Look at the consequences, starting with unnecessary taxes. What does that mean? Well, if your client has appreciated assets, I'm sure there's an estate plan that would call for passing those appreciated assets through the estate for a free step up. But if you're using the pay for care, you've created unnecessary taxes. And by the way, when are you liquidating the pay for care? If this was in 2008, you would have actualized an unactualized loss. I actually saw that when I was practicing. And families were so reluctant to sell because the market was down 20, 25%. So not only were they spending money on care, they were losing the appreciation of it. Liquidity. I had two very successful businesses, but I wasn't liquid. By the way, just as an aside, it's one of the reasons I bought permanent life insurance. I became my own bank. But putting that aside, your client might be worth $3 or $4 million, but how much is that as liquid? How much of it could be sold? Could it be sold at a profit? And was that asset generating income? Was that an investment property? Well, that's gone. And look at this. Every capital dollar used for care is one less dollar available in the future to generate income, which is diametrically opposed to the advice that you've been offering, that the portfolio remain intact to execute the responsibilities your client wanted to keep. That's all undermined. Now, what is the risk of needing care? I will suggest to you, in the client's mind, is absolutely zero. And that's what we would suggest that you tell the client. I'm not suggesting you will need care, but Tom, do you begin to see the consequences and how severe they are? See how that changes the intent? So let's take a practical application of this concept that will help you. Michael and Laura are 75. They've accumulated $2 million in qualified and cash equivalents. The income portfolio generates 4 to 5%, $125,000 a year. Social Security is probably a little more. But let's say the couple is generating $165,000. Here are their expenses. Helping a child who hasn't made the best decision. Believe me, when I did volunteer work, I saw it all the time. In fact, the worst thing I saw was a couple in their early 60s come in to the office and ask how they file a petition for guardianship of a minor child. And I'd look at the family and I said, tell me what happened. We have to raise our granddaughter. And I would say, where is your daughter? And as God's my witness, they looked at me and they said, she's dead. She died of an overdose. Where's the father? We have no idea. If any of you ever had that conversation with a client, I have. And just as an aside, they say, you know, our retirement is completely gone. It will eat into our savings. Of course, we're going to put her in private school. Of course, we're going to take the best care of her that we can. We'll pay for her college. You see? So here's a family who's made a commitment to a child, education, vacations, tithing to their church. You know something? They have a pretty good life. But now watch what happens. Michael's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So watch this for a second. What's been allocated from the portfolio and the cash flow to pay for his care for the next 8 to 10 years? Let me just go back for a second. What's been allocated from the $2 million and the $165,000? What's been allocated from it? Now, most of you as advice will say nothing. It's just the portfolio is allocated for something else. You know what the real answer is? All of it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when they come to see you looking for a product, or if they can't get the product, who's next in line? Me. These are exactly the people who I see. Never had a plan, never thought about it, Then you have the illness, and now they realize everything is on the line. And for those who will tell you they can self-insure, as the sun comes up in the east in the morning, I will tell you that the minute they get a diagnosis, the first person they call isn't their spouse. They call you looking for, drum roll, long-term care insurance. And these are the policies that go in that have to be rated or declined. You see? And that's how serious the subject is. No discussion by an advisor with the client about the consequences of an event. I want to share that with you. To give you an idea where we are, we have about 15 or 20 minutes left and have some time for some questions. So now let's change the intent of the conversation. I think you now understand the two sets of consequences, emotionally and physically, to those, listen carefully, respectfully, who have no choice but to put their lives aside to take care of their loved one. My 3 children with my first wife, Carolyn, having no choice but to put aside their lives to take care of someone that they love and they adore. They adore their mother. 71 years old. Pause intentional. So let's show you how you can change the intent of the conversation. So instead of a client arguing with you that they believe there is no risk, they say to you, I never thought of it as a set of consequences to my family. That's really the goal of this conversation. So let's look at traditional selling ideas and how it creates conflict with your targeted market. And for those of you who are out there, if you've tried this, it gets you into arguments all the time. They're debilitating. Won't happen to me. I'll put a gun in my mouth. I can self-insure. I'm too young. What if I don't use it, the product? Because you know what they think you're doing? They think you're trying to sell a product to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Let me show you. So before we begin, let me give you a survey here. How many of you have ever heard these objections? What if I never need care? No one in the family has ever lived long enough to need care. It's too expensive. I can self-insure. I'm too young. I need to think about it. See, the business you're in is not trying to sell a product, but when you use risk, which I'll show you in a second, it comes across as trying to hustle a product. Look at the objections you get. They're natural. And who creates most of these objections? Generally speaking, healthy men. Generally speaking. So, 3 steps to an argument. Step 1, tell me if you haven't been doing this. I think you have. It's risk-based, which makes perfect sense. You get these statistics that talk about the risk of needing care as one ages and the cost of care. And by the way, there's no doubt, I'm 72. If I live long enough, I'm going to need care. By the way, what do I want to hear about it from you for? Do you know what I think? If you're my fight, you know why I think you're telling me I'm going to need care? You're trying to sell me a product. Have a nice day. But that's the thought. Here's the risk, which is substantial. And the cost is substantial. So, all right, look, I'm going to show you that you're going to need care. And by the way, let me tell you what's going to happen to you. Step 2, it's client-based. You tell me that I'm a burden to my family. I'll lose my independence. I won't be able to get into a good nursing home. I'll lose my asses paying for care. You're basically threatening me. See, risk-based, client-centric. And who comes in and saves the day? Who comes in and saves the day? Drum roll. Correct. Long-term care insurance. And how many times have you said to a client, if you own long-term care insurance, you're not a burden to your family. If you own the product, you can protect your assets. If you own the product, you can stay home. I mean, it would make perfect sense. You're laying out the risk, you're laying out what the problem is, and then you're laying out how you solve the problem. It's risk-based, client-centric, product-driven. Well, it's founded on the deeply flawed assumption that risk motivates client to take action. Yeah, you know what the action is? To get out of the room. I don't want to hear it. Who does this work with? People you don't have to sell. People who need care. People who need care simply present an application. People with a serious, debilitating prior experience, you don't need to sell them anything. You know why they want to talk to you about the product? Because they want to make sure that what their family went through, their family doesn't go through. But you can't expand the market and talk to those who are healthy and don't want to talk to you because they are, unless you understand the psychology of denial. Risk-based selling doesn't work. It embarrasses you. It creates debilitating objections. So let's change the intent of the conversation. When you change the way you see things, the things you see will change. And we're asking you, to think about this. And if you want more information, get back to Nationwide, get back to BUI, and they'll give you some ideas on how you can craft a conversation that doesn't create objections. It creates information that the client can process. And if it's done seriously enough and you deeply believe in the subject, I'm telling you what the client will do if he or she loves their family, will say to you, are you serious? Are you serious, Tom? Tom's the advisor. So Tom, you're telling me I'm not going to need care, but if I did, my kids may never talk to each other over it. And you, as an advisor, for the first time, you can sit there and say, absolutely. And Tom, you told me the paying for care will disrupt the portfolio that's allocated to make sure I keep my kid. And you can say for the first time what? Absolutely. See how the difference? Take a look at the psychology of risk assessment between men and women, because that's what it comes down to, whether they're going to buy a product if they think the risk is there. So let me just show you a couple of interesting things. Take a second, and I think it'll be very helpful to you. So let's take a look at something called evolutionary psychology. Don't fog out on me. Stick with me, it's very interesting. Evolutionary psychology is the study of how our brains evolved as a species over hundreds of thousands of years to allow us to compete and survive a harsh environment. There's a subset of evolutionary psychology called, ever hear this, gender differentiation, that generally speaking, women's brains are composed to do certain things quite well, and men's brains are composed to do. Listen, I'm not making this up. It's pretty basic. What does it have to do with everything? Let me show you. Here are men, generally speaking. They're wired for coordination of movement. Well, that's hunting. Problem solving. Guys are not multitaskers. Thank you. But give them a problem, they'll assess it, and they'll solve it. Spatial memory. That's map reading. Aggression. Needed. Short-term focus. Nothing to the left, nothing to the right. And here is the most important bullet that allows you to move forward and to increase your activity by understanding the certain things that you say to clients, including men, don't help you. Men have a deep sense of invulnerability expressed in a disregard and minimizing of risk. This has all been approved, by the way, by compliance. I'm not making this stuff up. So let me show you what I mean by that last bullet. Give you another second to look at that. Okay. By definition, hunting and protecting those they hunt for carry an inherent risk of dying or becoming seriously disabled. Absolutely. So if men actually measured, thought about, ruminated, or wrung their hands over those substantial risks, would they do either? Would they hunt? Would they? No, of course not. Oh my God, I'm going to die if I go hunting. Oh my God, I'm going to die if I try and protect my family. No, they're not wired like that. They're not wired like that. Now watch how this ties in with thinking about the risk of needing care. Do you already see how it works? Here's the result. Men generally, capital should be capital G, separate the risk of an awful event happening from the consequences of the event. So what I mean is, if they deeply believe the risk of needing care or dying or becoming disabled during working years is essentially zero, then what? What are the consequences to their family? If there are no consequences, why purchase a product to cover them? Now, how does this work in reality? Here you are, respectfully, you've been taught to talk about the risk of needing care, backed by statistics, and show what the cost of care is, which is going up. And what are you sharing? You're sharing risk. Now, if you're talking to people who need the product, you're home. But those who don't have a prior experience, you know what they say to you, won't happen to me, because what you're trying to do is to force risk down their throats. It is separate. It is isolated from what their primary responsibilities as decent men are, and that is to protect and to provide. And that's what we're going to shift the emphasis to in just a moment. So there it is. What if I never need care? That is no risk, no consequences. Have a nice day. No one in my family's ever lived a long life to need care. No risk, no consequences to my family. I can self-insure, no risk, no consequences to the portfolio, which is why he's willing to use every last dollar to pay for care. Of course he is, because he's not going to need the care. See what happens when you use risk? Pause intentional. And to give you an idea where we are in timing, about 10 minutes. We have time for some questions. So let's look at women's brains just for a second, thank goodness. This is generally speaking. Generally speaking, they develop characters that favor gathering, interpreting, auditory, and visual information. What the hell is that? I'll tell you what that is. If you have a 2 or 3-year-old and the child's up at 3 o'clock in the morning screaming, and you're the husband, what do you hope will happen? Yeah, the kid will stop crying, or your wife will take care of the child. Now, to a male, to a guy, to a husband, to a dad, the kid's just screaming. But women want to know why the child is crying. You see the difference? Gathering, interpreting of. See, that's the difference. Reading emotions, women are very good at that. Empathy, intuition, bonding. And here's the key. And here's why you usually want a woman in the room when you're talking about insurance. Women have a terrible aversion to risk. It's a strong aversion to risk. The minute they have a child, they see everything as a risk to that child and want to protect that child. You see? This is all backed up. I just want to show you. But anyway, so let me put it in context for you. Please stick with me because the results are really powerful. So women invest vast amounts of energy in doing so, and by definition are protective of children at all stages of life. This is manifested in worrying. Women worry about everything. Women have an internal prism which takes a risk. Listen, everyone. Women have an internal prism which takes a risk and refracts it into a kaleidoscope of consequences. I let my child start the car when he was 15 years old. That was a mistake. You know what I heard? What if he put the car in reverse? What if he went down a one-way street? He could have killed someone. He could have gotten in an accident. Didn't you think about that when you had him start the car? You know something? By the way, I still had him start the car. I just didn't tell my wife. But you see how they look at it? Everything's a risk. And good for them. The result is that unlike men who generally separate the risk of an unexpected death, the risk of an unexpected disability, the risk of an unexpected need for care of an extended period of years from the consequences of the event, women look at these risks and their consequences as what, everyone? As one and the same. A risk is a consequence. Now do you start to understand why, if you're talking about life insurance, which you should, of course, talk about, you generally want what? The wife in the room. The difference? If you ask him, do you think you're going to die, Tom, during working years? The answer is no. If you ask his wife, do you think you're going to die during working years? You know what women will say almost to a person? I hope we don't. Why? Why? Because they see the consequences that they did. Interesting, huh? I'm not saying anything so you can get it. It's pretty cool, isn't it? Every father's throwing a kid up in the air. This is as I see it. He's barely out of my arms. No big deal. Look at how the kid sees it. But look at the mother. Look at that. What are you doing? You're going to kill my kid. And by the way, he's doing it on an active road. You see the road over there? Yeah. See, the guy's not a big deal. Wife, awful consequences. Let's finish up here. And thank you so much for your time. As I mentioned, if you ask a man if he believes he'll ever need extended care, the answer is no. Why? He can't see himself not being available to take care of those he loves. How powerful is that thought? How powerful is that thought? He cannot see himself not being available to take care of those he loves. Let me focus on that a second and give you a different reason why people buy life insurance. You see that thought? Speaking for myself, I cannot see myself not available to take care of my child with my wife. Do you know what life insurance is? It's a physical manifestation of my absolute commitment. How powerful is that idea? You know what this subject is when you bring it to someone's attention? You have to remember that in their 50s or 60s, couples have begun to realize that their commitments to their family are absolute. Look, the child may leave your house, the child doesn't leave your life. And when you talk about keeping these financial commitments, that's exactly right. But now, do you believe it makes sense to talk about an event that threatens all of this with consequences, not based on risk? If you ask a woman if she believes she'll ever need care, she'll almost always hesitate and then answer, I hope I don't, because she sees the potential consequences to others. Wow, it's pretty cool stuff. A few more slides, everyone. Thank you again for attending. And just so you know, I've mentioned men, works just the opposite. If the husband is the primary care provider, he's directly involved in the day-to-day raising and nurturing of the children. And you know what he does? He sees the consequences of doing so. As such, he likely will insist that his wife purchase life insurance, DI. See how it works both ways? See how it works both ways? Would the wife, who's the primary earner, buy these products? Maybe not, because she sees herself as indispensable. Interesting, huh? So let's finish up here. Let's change the focus of the conversation. It starts with an understanding of what motivates decent men. A man's sense of purpose, decent man's sense of purpose in many ways, is connected to his ability to take care of others, in this case, his family. Making an unqualified commitment to them creates great purpose, which brings a sense of pride, well-being, value, and meaning to his life. That purpose is manifested by assuming responsibilities, which reinforces his deepest instincts to provide and protect, even to the detriment of his own health. Wow. Now that you have that understanding, and it's likely you, watch how we change the intent of the conversation. Anything that threatens my family that you brought to my attention, I'll listen to. Anything that threatens me, and you tell me I'm going to need care, you're doing it for one reason, to sell me a product, which I don't need, because it ain't going to happen to me. But if you bring to my attention that if I needed care, it would devastate my children with my first spouse, if you bring to my attention that if my first wife, Carolyn, who I'm close with, ever needed care, it would devastate my children, I say to you, what do you mean? And give you permission to continue the conversation. See how powerful that thought is? So we change a series of risks, which he believes are being told to him or her for the specific reason of selling a product to solve it, to a series of consequences. So here's the idea of consultative engagement. We're going to change the conversation from risk to consequences. The client is educated about how an unexpected need for care would so severely compromise him. Look at that word. He'd be so, or her would be so seriously compromised that he's no longer available to protect and provide for those he loves, resulting in serious, if not irreversible, consequences to them. Wow. Let me give you a scenario which I think we can make available to you. Watch this conversation. So I'm the advisor. I'm talking with my client, whose name is Edward, and I've known him for 20 years. Listen to the conversation. So Ed, any questions on the portfolio review? And he says, no, I'm up to date. And I say to him, Ed, do you have a few minutes? He says, of course, what's on your mind? And I say to him, and I want to talk, watch the language here. Ed, I want to talk to you about a subject that left unattended to and ever occurred has the potential of causing serious, if not irreversible consequences, Ed, to the people you invited into your life and you said you take responsibility for. What are you talking about? Well, that event is extended care. What is that? It's caused by impairments. You explain what they are, but listen to the language. Here's what's important, Ed. As they progress, they would so seriously compromise you, listen to the language, that the people, Ed, that you said that you would take care of would have to put their lives aside to take care of you. I have to find that that's unacceptable to you. And what does a decent guy say? I never thought of it like that. And by the way, I can't imagine that you want your kids involved with this. No, it's none of their business. They have their own lives, to which we would teach you to say, tell me what choice they'll have. You see what you just done? He looks at you. Any mention about product? Any mention about risk? And then you continue. That's the first consequence. And the second consequence is reallocating your portfolio to pay. What do you mean? Well, we have to reallocate it. Who's it coming from? Someone that he or she or they trust. This is why we have to believe that conversations like this will have you think differently. You know, this is really a pretty cool conversation when it's put like this. You know, I ask me to sell a product. You're asking me to do what I do naturally, which is offer advice. As I said before, let the client conclude that the consequences are serious enough. There, that's consultative engagement. It works both ways. Let's finish up. So part three, funding a plan, what a long-term care solution actually does. It's very interesting. So now that the client has allowed you to create a plan to protect those he or she loves from an unexpected need for care, let's stop right there. There's a slide missing here, but let's take a look at the plan. So you've now explained to me, I'm the client in this case, what would happen to my family, my first and second family, what would happen to my portfolio. And I would say to you, are you serious? And for the first time, you can say as my advisor, I'm dead serious. And I'd say that I don't want that to happen. What comes up next? I apologize, the slide's missing. You'd suggest a plan. And I say, what's the plan? The plan, Harley, is simple. It's to keep you home, keep you safe, and mitigate the two sets of consequences. What's the first set? Emotionally and physically to caregivers, and financially to the portfolio. That's the plan. I want to keep you home, Harley, keep you safe, and mitigate the consequences to your family, emotionally, physically, and financially. I'd say go ahead. So that's the plan. Now the client is asking, now the plan's created. The question is, how's it funded? Because to protect the family emotionally, physically, you have to bring in professionals to provide the care, allowing the family to supervise it. But where do you get that funding from? And that's where we want to position this product in the few minutes we have left. Which one of the following motivates a client to purchase long-term care insurance in any form? To maintain his independence, choose where and how his care is delivered. He doesn't want to be a burden to his family. He wants to protect his assets. All of the above or none of the above. Of course, you've been told all of the above. No. 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 Not the people who you want to talk to, healthy people, because what do they believe? None of these things will happen. See, it's all him or her oriented. They don't buy it for that reason. And we don't suggest that you sell it for that reason. If I believe I'll never need care, I'll never have a chronic illness, what do I care about maintaining my independence? If I believe I'm never going to be stricken with dementia, why would I be interested in buying a product to protect my assets? Will I buy a product because I don't want to be a burden to my family? No, because I'm not going to need care. You see, you might say that's crazy, but when you think about the objections you're getting from healthy people, what you're trying to sell them is risk to sell a product. Let's look at something different. In the 1 or 2 minutes we have left. Let's properly position a long-term care solution. So watch. Here's the sequence of the conversation we suggest. Step one, the conversation focuses on the key question, who and what are important to you as you move into the future? Of course, you'd ask that question anyway. Have things changed since we last had a conversation, Harley? Tell me what's important. I would tell you my former spouse is important. I would remind you that we have a 20-year-old child. We want to make sure that he continues with his life unabated. I would tell you that I have commitments to charities, remember? So I'm telling you what's important to me. You educate me about what would happen to my ability to keep these commitments if I ever needed care. So your job is to educate me about the two sets of severe consequences. That's the job you're in. You're in the business of educating me. And you educate me about what happens to my family, what happens to my ability to keep my financial commitments. That's step two. Step three is you put a plan together, which we talked about. The plan, the goal of which is to keep me safe at home while mitigating the two sets of consequences. And finally, since it was the client that asked you to create a plan, you have every right to ask the client, what do you think will fund it? And we'll finish with this, everyone, and we're right on time. We'll finish with this. A long-term care solution should be positioned as a funding source for that plan. That sound familiar? That's how life insurance is positioned. It's a funding source for a plan. A long-term care solution provides a predictable stream of income. That income is not positioned with the client is paying for care. Why? Why? That's it. He doesn't need care. Positions of funding is funding the plan. I will not let you put together a plan to protect me. I don't need no stinking protection. I will allow you to put together a plan because you educated me about what would happen to my family if there wasn't one. And by doing so, it mitigates the two sets of consequences providing care has on the family. Paying for someone to provide care allows those a client loves to supervise it. That's the huge difference. This is a direct and positive impact on the emotional and physical well-being of the caregiver. In turn, it makes it far more likely that the primary caregiver can keep his or her spouse home longer. By the way, absolutely true. The incident of policies paying for nursing homes are under 10%. Most of that care is for care at home. And look at this. You just gave the kids a second gift of life. Lily, Emily, and Ben. First gift is bringing them into this life. The second gift is to say it's not your responsibility to take care of your mother or I. What? Your mother or I. How powerful is that? So a long-term care solution mitigates the first set of consequences. And last slide, and thank you for all of you for your time. By providing a stream of income to pay for care, there's no need to reallocate cash flow from the portfolio, pension, or Social Security. This allows the client to keep financial obligations. Since little or no money has to be allocated to pay for care, it obviates the need to use capital. So guess what? Long-term care solution mitigates the second set of consequences. Where's the family? As best as possible, it's placed back to where they were prior to the illness. That's how powerful the product is. And I would suggest to you, if any of you have had someone claim on a policy, that's exactly what it did. And the client called you and couldn't thank you enough. So that is our presentation. And I think we have some time for some questions. Charlene, do you have any questions? Or Mickey, anyone?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Harley. So I've asked everybody to submit their questions in chat. I've got a couple that have been submitted directly.
Yes.
Do want to hit a couple while everybody's potentially typing up their questions here, a couple of just housekeeping items here.
Sure.
I've got a number of messages asking if this presentation is going to be made available. It is. It has been recorded. I will send it out to everyone. So if you see a subject line labeled Harley Gordon, that's the presentation. So you want to be sure to open that. Secondly, I know there's a lot more CFPs on this call than have signed up for the CFP credit. So if you want credit, be sure you click on that link that I entered in the chat box. So as far as questions for you go, Harley,
Sure.
So it seems that, I'm summarizing here, it seems that some on the call are working with younger executives. And the question is that it seems that most long-term care discussions start in the 55 to 65 range, but for a younger executive, what age do you think it's appropriate to start having that conversation?
Great question. I would say in their mid to late 40s, early 50s. Two reasons. One, many beginning to realize their commitments to their family are absolute. In other words, when they were younger, they actually said, you know, the kids will be out of the house, just be you and I will be, no. They realize their commitments to their families are absolute. Many are seeing the need for care with parents or friends that they're going through right now. So they're more likely to listen to the subject. So let me give you a great opening line, okay? And I think this would be very helpful to you, talking to a 45-year-old executive, and you know that his mother and father are alive. You ready for this? Here's a great question. So Peter, do you ever think about what would happen to you if your mother or father ever needed care of an extended period of years? What a great question. You know what you're going to hear more often? You know what you're going to hear, Mickey? Yeah, I've been thinking about it. Because the parents are in their 70s or 80s and they start to worry about their parents. Did you ever think about what would happen to you? What do you mean? Think about where you would be. Well, I mean, they can take care. Think about what would happen to your mother and how she would likely start to fail emotionally and physically taking care of someone who's so chronically ill. Can you see yourself or your sister stepping in? He said, she's never thought of it like that. See how powerful that is? So that gives them an incentive to talk to their parents about talking about a plan and to sit down with you. It also gives you an opportunity to talk about what would happen to your adult children. So that's how we bring it up. Tell me what would happen to you if your mother and father ever needed care of an extended period of years. He said, I never thought of it. What are you talking about? See what happens, guys? They have a chance to continue the conversation. Well, let's play this out. And by the way, for all the women in the audience, whenever you're talking to men, please use this statement. Eddie, let's play that out. You never have to say that to women. They play everything out. But let's play out what happens. And when you do that and you lay out what happens, I never thought of it like that. Watch everyone. The client says, what if I never need care? What do we teach you to say? Did I say you would? Never said you would. What if I don't live a long life? I never said you would. And listen to the language. Eddie, you're looking at this as a series of risks to you. This is a conversation about a series of consequences to them. The people you invited into your life, you said you take responsibility for. Now, Mickey, imagine once the advisor deeply believes the subject is worth her or his spending time on, do you know what the client's going to say? Are you serious? And for the first time, the advisor can say, I'm dead serious, and see how they continue the conversation. So anyway, that's how I would get involved with someone in their late 40s to early 50s. Ask them if their parents are alive. Have you ever thought about what would happen to you and your relationship with sisters?
So there's a follow-up question here that is that's very similar on the same topic, and the question is well, the question is essentially, you mentioned that you looked at the consequences of your ex-wife and what that would mean to your kids, and you stepped in and essentially bought a policy for her but really to benefit your kids.
Exactly.
So the question is, in the same example where you have that executive that's in their late 40s or early 50s, and they do have a mother who's maybe a single mother in 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Should the conversation be about planning for the longevity of mom or them at that point?
No, here's how you bring it up. Everyone get a pencil and paper. 3, 2, 1. Here's how you have a conversation. You say to the client, Eddie, I understand your mother's alive. Yes. How old is she? Early 70s. Watch the question. Do you worry about her? Is that a hell of a question? And Mickey, what's he going to say? Yeah, I'm starting to worry about her. And now how you continue the conversation. This is what we teach you. How do you continue the conversation? So you say, Ed, have you ever thought about what would happen to you and your wife and the children if your mother ever needed care? You know what you're going to hear sometimes? My wife will probably get involved with it. Do you have sisters? Yeah. Tell me what they would do. I hadn't thought. Do you think they're going to shut you off or say, I never thought of it like that? Because the underlying concern is that their mother's getting older. My 3 children were 40, 38, 39, and I didn't realize how much they worry about me. How much they worry about me. How much they worry about me. I had open heart surgery 2 years ago. You know what I realized? I wasn't important to my children. I was essential to my children. I was essential to my children. I had my middle daughter expecting a first child say to me over dinner, I hope all of you guys out there who have daughters, listen to what she said to me. She put a knife and fork down and said, I could never thank you enough for my life. Now, for those of you who don't understand what I just said, every decent guy lives to hear that. If I had taken my last breath after that, it was a pretty good life. So now let's put this into context. You're talking to my daughter, Emily. You're the advisor. And you say to Emily, I know your mom's alive. Her name's Carolyn, my ex-wife. Do you worry about it? And what would Emmy say? Of course I do.